Okay, I believe we're ready to go.
Well, greetings. I want to welcome folks to our community conversation for March the 16th of 2022. I am Pastor Park Hunter of Onalaska United Methodist Church, and I will be your moderator today. Community Conversations are a shared ministry of English Lutheran Church in La Crosse and of the Interfaith Leaders Coalition, a group of churches and faith leaders who meet regularly to pray for one another and also consider the needs and concerns of our community. We have one more presentation this spring. In April, we will be hosting a panel discussion on how electric cars will help save the world with folks from Dairyland Power and the Sierra Club and local electric transportation advocates. It should be a fascinating discussion. In the meantime, I want to share that Interfaith Leaders has a new set of coordinators. We are grateful to Pastor Mark Qualley of English Lutheran and Rabbi Brian Searle of Congregation Sons of Abraham for stepping up to share leadership there. And at this point, I'm going to welcome Pastor Mark to offer a prayer this morning. Mark, you're muted. Mark, you're still muted.
Now can you hear me? Okay. God, whose spirit moved over the deep, we can thank you for the gift of water, the waters on the earth and under the earth, the water above us and within us. Make us mindful of the care of all the planet's water, that it may richly sustain life for us and for those who come after us. Amen.
Thank you, Mark. A reminder for those who are joining us on YouTube that this is a conversation. So after our presentation today, then you are welcome during the last 15 minutes or so to post questions in the YouTube chat, and I will share them with our panelists. Our presentation today is What's in Your Water? It's a conversation about water quality and things to be aware of, as this is an issue that's been in the news both locally and nationally lately. And to introduce our speakers, I'm going to welcome Carl Green, who is a member of the Community Conversations Steering Committee and who's worked on putting this program together. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you, Pastor Hunter. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to introduce our two speakers. We'll have back-to-back speakers, Jason Lowry from the Wisconsin DNR, and then Dr. Paul M. Bradley from the U.S. Geological Survey. So Jason Lowry is the Technical Operations Coordinator for the Wisconsin DNR's Office of Emerging Contaminants, focusing primarily on cross-program coordination of PFAS-related work. Jason was also the DNR Spill Response Team Leader and Superfund Site Assessment Team Leader between 2013 and 2020. Licensed professional geologist in the state of Wisconsin. He obtained his BA Geology from Lawrence University in Appleton and his MS in Hydrogeology from Illinois State University. And then I'll go into Dr. Paul Bradley's bio as well. Dr. Bradley is a research hydrologist and ecologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. He is co-lead along with Kelly Smaling, who is also on Zoom here tonight. of the USGS Environmental Health Program, Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Integrated Science Team. Dr. Bradley's research focuses on human exposures to and potential effects of inorganic, organic, and microbial contaminant mixtures in the drinking water at the point of use and on anthropogenic contaminant mixtures as ecosystem stressors. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Jason.
All right, thank you, Carl, and thank you everybody in attendance for your interest in PFAS and what's going on French Island. So I'm gonna try to share my screen here. And can people see that?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thanks. So I'm gonna, so yeah, as Carl mentioned, I'm the technical operations coordinator for our Office of Emerging Contaminants. So I focus almost exclusively on PFAS. I don't spend a ton of time on this specific project, but I work on a lot of cross-program issues and just kind of bigger, big picture stuff. So I do have some familiarity with this site, though. We've talked a lot about it. So what I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to basically three things: the hydrogeology of French Island, what we know about PFAS contamination on the island, and then where people can get additional information. First of all, I wanted to give people an update on the site investigation status. So the city of La Crosse is continuing their site investigation. They're responsible for determining the extent of impacts and conducting mitigation of known receptors and remediation of source areas. So between a lot of the sampling has focused on private well sampling. So between the city of La Crosse, the town of Campbell, and the Wisconsin DNR, there's been a total of 564 private wells that have been sampled. So the samples are pretty evenly distributed across French Island. And so as far as results go, almost all the wells have detections of PFAS. So all but 13 of the wells, and 157 of those wells have exceeded our proposed standards or proposed health advisory levels or hazard index. So, so the city of La Crosse is supplying bottled water to approximately 58 residences, and that's for the area that they're responsible for. And then the DNR is supplying bottled water to over 1,240 residences. And then if people want to get additional information, I'll be showing that at the end. That's on our Bureau of Remediation and Redevelopment on the web database. So there's all kinds of links. People can see the latest reports and contact information. So I'll show you how to do that, how to get to that page at the very end. So this is a groundwater flow map for French Island. So if you want to think about the groundwater flow on the island, just kind of think of it as and this is an oversimplification, you can think of it as sort of a sandbox. So imagine if you had a small stream of water and somebody just dumped a pile of sand on that water, on that flowing water. So you would have water, water would back up and some would flow around, a lot of it would flow around that pile of sand, but underneath that pile of sand, you'd still have water flowing, within that sand at the bottom of the pile. And it would generally be flowing the same direction as the stream that's going around it. So that's kind of what you have here. That's complicated by a couple things. There's these dams here that they're not aligned exactly perpendicular to the river. It's also complicated by the fact that you have a bunch of wells that are, they're pumping water, not necessarily evenly distributed across the island. Those have an impact, particularly three-dimensionally. But on this, so far what we've seen So we have in this map here, the lines that are going, first of all, you can see the dams that are in the northeast corner and the southwest corner of the map. And then you have these lines that are running, generally northeast to southwest, and those are equal potential lines. I think this is just the shallow groundwater flow map, but the deep groundwater flow map looks pretty similar. Sometimes those can vary. But those lines that run northeast to southwest, those are the equal potential lines. So those are lines of equal elevation. And water, just like a lot of, most other things, they flow from higher pressure to lower pressure. So your higher elevations are in the northwest. If you head further northwest, those are higher elevations, and then the lower elevations are toward the southeast. So your flow direction is going to be perpendicular to those equal potential lines. So that's why you can see these lines with the arrows that run from the northwest to the southeast. You can see it gets a little more complicated as you get close to the dams, but in general, it's a southeasterly flow direction for both the shallow groundwater and the deeper groundwater. Then the contamination that always flows in the same direction as the water itself. It generally flows a little bit slower though, because it can stick to soil particles along the way. So this is an aerial photograph, and sorry, this is kind of busy. The map on the one on the left is an aerial photograph of the north portion of the island, and then the map on the right is a photo of the south portion of the island. And you can see there's a bunch of dots here. You can see the airport. You can see the various source areas. So the area in the blue hash, hopefully people can see that. That's on the map on the left. That's the area that the city of La Crosse has accepted responsibility for. So they're conducting the sampling and any mitigation that's needed for those areas. But you also can see all these blue and red dots, and those are the private wells that have been sampled. So the ones outside of the blue hashed area, those were sampled by the Department of Natural Resources. So you can also see, there's two different colors there. The ones in blue are below our health advisory levels or hazard index of 1. And the ones that are in red, those are above our proposed health advisory levels or the hazard index of 1. So that's where we recommend that people, for those wells, that people don't drink the water, particularly for pregnant women or women of childbearing age or breastfeeding mothers. So the site investigation is ongoing, and for that area outside the blue hash, you can see that there is contamination. There is some significant PFAS contamination that's above our recommended standards in that area. So we are unaware of other contributing sources outside of the city study areas. Although there are a few potential sources of PFAS contamination. So some of those included, we're not, as I said, the site investigation is still ongoing. We're hoping to, as that site investigation continues, and we get more data, maybe we can better pin down other sources or another source of PFAS contamination in the island. But some contributing factors that have been identified, potential contributing factors include aerial deposition of PFAS, maybe other uses of firefighting foam that historically occur on the island. There's the historical, I understand this current septic systems on the island are pretty limited, but historically there's been a lot of septic systems, is my understanding. And then there is that Mississippi River that's basically flowing underneath the island. And even though the river itself does not have close to 20 parts per trillion total PFOA and PFOS, if there's other sources that are added on top of that, it could contribute to a health advisory exceedance. So Our Department of Health Services has issued an interim health area-wide health advisory for the island, and that can be issued when test results indicate that we may have a problem, and well water exists in that area. And we don't have enough data at the time to know for sure exactly which specific wells are affected. So as we obtain more data, the area included in the interim advisory, it can become larger or smaller, or the advisory can be changed to include only specific wells where problems are known to exist. So yeah, right now it's for the entire island, but that could change as time goes on. All right. So yeah, sorry, I got a slide behind. So yeah, I did include a link here to there's a hazard index calculator. This is on the Department of Health Services webpage. So if people wanted to, if you have your results handy and you want to see, so basically we're comparing the results to a health index of 1. So each detection is assigned a hazard quotient. So it's that detection divided by the proposed standard for that compound or group of compounds, and then those hazard quotients are added up. And if they're added up to a health index, and if the hazard index, and then if the hazard index is over 1, we do not recommend that people drink the water. If it's below 1, we deem that to be okay. So yeah, so we'll just see. As I said, the site investigation is ongoing. We're continuing to sample wells, so that could change in the future. So a lot of people that are attending here may be on bottled water. So if you are, just an update on that, if you're receiving bottled water, you do not need to do anything at this time. I did put a screenshot here on our webpage if people who aren't getting bottled water right now, and if they are interested in that, there's a email address and other contact information for somebody you can contact to get that bottled water. So that's for the entire island. But over time, as we get more information, we may determine that, as I said, specific wells are okay, or specific parts of the island, it's okay to drink that water. All right. I just want to also go into some just general DNR updates. So first of all, for rules, we've had 4 rules recently that went to our Natural Resources Board, 1 in January and 3 in February. The ones that I'll talk about are related to groundwater and drinking water. So those both went to our Natural Resources Board in February, and our proposed groundwater rule was halted. It was stopped by our Natural Resources Board, so that was not adopted. It does not go forward to the legislature. However, that combined proposed standard of 20 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS, we're still considering that a health-based level, and there are no other numbers that we have available for PFOA and PFOS that are up to date. So I wouldn't right now. We're just telling people don't assume that anything has changed as far as the spills law remediation. Those are still the numbers that we're using. And then for drinking water, our board they modified our proposed standard of 20 parts per trillion to 70 parts per trillion. That's based on the health advisory level that EPA came out with a few years ago. So at least if that's gone to our legislature, I think may have been signed by the governor already. But if that goes, assuming that goes through and it's promulgated, then municipalities would be required to, certain municipalities would be required to sample their entry points for PFOA and PFOS, and they'd be required to take corrective action if their concentrations are above 70 parts per trillion. But again, we'd still want to let people know, if levels are above 20 parts per trillion, we still want people to know about that, and we would not still recommend drinking that water. We have a firefighting foam collection program that we're trying to get started. We had $1 million that was allocated in our biennial budget for that. So you can stay tuned for updates on that. And we have started a voluntary municipal well sampling program. So again, that's voluntary, but I think, that's in anticipation of, our drinking water MCLs and the EPA is coming out with MCLs for PFOA and PFOS. So this is a way for municipalities to get ahead of that. And then finally, there's infrastructure. People know about the bipartisan infrastructure law that was recently passed. There's going to be a lot of money for communities to take action related to drinking water and wastewater. So those are through our revolving loan funds. So for the revolving loan funds for drinking water and clean water. So for drinking water, if it's not too early to start applying for grants, and the drinking water and groundwater contact in your region of the state is Eileen Pierce. So she'd be the person if the community wanted to apply for something. That's the person to get more information from. A real important federal update is that the EPA has come out with their Pfas strategic roadmap, and I provide a link here for it. But if you do look in a search engine, you can easily find more information on that roadmap. There's the 3 goals here, overall goals for the roadmap, and it is pretty aggressive. It outlines several proposed actions to be conducted within the next few years between now and 2024. So the goals: research, restrict, and remediate. You can see that there's 5 approaches here. Consider the life cycle of PFAS, get upstream of the problem, hold polluters accountable, ensure science-based decision-making, and then prioritize protection of disadvantaged communities. And then within that, there's 31 proposed actions with specific target dates. And there's a significant, for those of you who are familiar with our WISPAC action plan, there's a lot of overlap with that. One thing that I think is pretty significant that people should be aware of that's within that roadmap is EPA is coming out with revised or draft reference doses for several PFAS compounds. So right now recently there's been five total reference doses that EPA has come out with. So there's 2 or 3 proposed reference doses and 2 finalized reference doses. So the finalized ones are for PF, let me see, I think it's PFBS and Gen X. And then there's proposed reference doses for PFHXA, PFOS, and PFOA. So those last 2 those are the main PFAS compounds that people think of. And something to keep in mind is those reference doses, either final or proposed, are all lower than the reference doses that our Department of Health Services used in proposing those health-based limits. So what does that mean? I think that means that when the EPA comes out with their MCLs for PFOA and PFOS, those are the draft MCLs should be coming out this year. They may be lower than what we propose. MCLs have to take practicability into account, so we're not quite sure. But as far as the maximum contaminant level goal, it could be close to 0. Those specific reference doses are under of public comment, so they could be modified. But then also our eventual groundwater standards or MCLs could also be lower. That's the next slide. I was asked to talk a little bit about nitrates. So nitrates are a common contaminant in the environment, and nitrate contamination, it can come from multiple sources. So nitrates form when ammonia or other nitrogen compounds combine with oxygen. Some common sources of nitrate contamination include animal waste, septic systems, and wastewater. So very common in sandy areas. I know French Island is not a It's not an agricultural area or an area where there's been, I don't think, animal waste that's been applied. But I know there's been, it's a sandy area, and there's been some septic systems on the island. So I'm not sure what what specifically there is as far as nitrate, but it is considered an essential test along with arsenic and bacteria. So, we do recommend that people, sample their well periodically for nitrates. Statewide, concentrations are increasing. You can see this figure here that shows the percent of wells that are over a nitrate standard overall. More than 10% of private wells around the state are impacted above the enforcement standard of 10 parts per million. And there's a lot of different there's a few different health impacts that are associated with nitrate contamination. So those include blue baby syndrome, birth defects, thyroid disease, and then an increased cancer risk. So I provide a couple links here. There's additional information you can find on the DHS webpage. And then there's a recent groundwater coordinating council report to the legislature from 2021. And that can be found on the DNR webpage. So if people want more information on nitrates, if that's a concern for you or your well, feel free to look at that. And then finally, for those of you who are interested in more information on the French Island case specifically, I included a link here. You can see it's a pretty simple URL that you can go to. You could also just search DNR BOTW in a search engine, and you could get to the same web page. So once you're there, that's the BERTS on the web, and BERT stands for Bureau of Remediation Redevelopment Tracking System. Under activity or location name, you can type in Town of Campbell, and then that will take you to the web page for the Town of Campbell remediation site. You can see there's a whole list of activities there. This is a screenshot right here. You can see there's links to PDFs of various reports. But for the most recent report, that's that one private. It's got the private well, sample results. So it's the one that says from 2021 0804, so August 4th of 2021. You can see what those results are. There's also site investigation reports that include monitoring well information. And then finally, for additional information, I listed a couple names here. If you want just additional information on PFAS in general, what's going on, with different programs, research on PFAS, I'm probably the best person to contact. Dave Rosenboom is the project manager for the Crosse site and the Town of Campbell site. So if you want more information on this specific site, even though I do know some things, obviously, but he knows a lot more about the what's going on in terms of the site investigation and just more specific technical information. So that's all I have. I can either take questions now or we can wait till later.
Let's go ahead and let Paul share, and then we'll do questions at the end of the presentation.
All right, thanks.
And Paul, are you ready to jump in here?
Yes, I am.
Great, thanks.
You see the screen okay?
Yes, we do.
All right. So drinking water quality is obviously a growing concern, both globally as well as across the U.S. nationally. And this is largely driven by population increases and the increasing impacts of the human population on our drinking water resources. So drinking water quality is a long, decades-long focus of the U.S. Geological Survey, and I'm going to give you a brief overview of some of the results from a specific project in the USGS Environmental Health Program's Water Infrastructure Integrated Science team. So the research focus of this team is illustrated in this schematic. It can be kind of conveniently divided into two general focus areas for research. One is on the wastewater release. So wastewater release is complex contaminant mixtures into the environment. And so one focus of the research is on effects to aquatic and terrestrial communities. Kind of on the opposite side from wastewater release is the potential for human exposures through drinking water, point of use drinking water. So whether or not you're focused on wastewater side or you're focused on the drinking water side, the same fundamental challenge exists. The number of chemicals that are in production commercially and therefore in the environment and potentially in drinking water resources is quite large. So if you're going by the TSCA inventory, that includes tens of thousands of chemicals that are identified as being toxic. If you go by a recent review article, which is estimating the number of chemicals in commercial production across the world, that exceeds 350,000 chemicals, or if you go by the Chemical Abstract Services Registry, which includes millions of organic and inorganic formulations. By any comparison, the number of compounds that are actually directly regulated in the US is quite small. So in drinking water, the national primary drinking water regulations, depending on how you count them up, apply to about 90 different chemicals. So this kind of theoretical contaminant complexity is actually occurring in the environment. This slide is summarizing a research collaboration between the USGS and the US EPA back in 2012 to 2014. That study was specifically focused on getting a better understanding of what kinds of contaminant mixtures are present in the environment. And so both agencies leveraged their analytical capabilities and in specific analyzed more than 700 organic analytes. In this study, more than 400 of those were actually detected in at least one site across the US, and over half of the compounds that were detected were either pesticides or pharmaceuticals, which are actually compounds that are engineered and designed specifically to have biological effects. So for the 38 surface water sites across the US, many of these sites are actually drinking water resources for downstream receptors. The results can be seen displayed here. So the 38 sites are displayed along the x-axis at the top. Without any labels, 200 of the 406 organic contaminants that were detected in this study are on the y-axis. So for each one of these sites, a red bar indicates the relative concentration of a detected compound in this study. So contaminant mixtures are the norm in the environment, not the exception. And we know that these kinds of contaminant mixtures are making through our drinking water treatment processes, in large part because our drinking water processes are not really designed for these kind of low-level contaminant concentrations. So this is another collaborative study between the USGS and the US EPA, specifically assessing more than 240 organic and inorganic compounds in both raw intake water as well as treated pre-distribution drinking water at 25 drinking water treatment plants across the US. And a number of compounds are detected in the intake water, as seen by this plot on the left. And then many of these compounds are actually making it through the drinking water treatment process and being distributed. So beginning in 2016, the USGS, in collaboration with a wide range of public health agencies, started conducting point-of-use drinking water specific research to kind of support these public health agencies by providing better understanding of what contaminant mixture exposures are in drinking water with two specific design criteria. First, we're assessing drinking water exposure at the point of use. And then the other is we're using an expanded analytical toolbox, so much larger than is typically employed in compliance monitoring for drinking water, but a toolbox that provides a more realistic representation of the contaminant complexity we see in the environment. So in the US and generally globally, there are three categories or distribution pipelines for drinking water to the consumer. There's public supply or community water supply. There's private supply, and then there's commercial or packaged or bottled water supply. In the US, the public supply or community water supply is regulated under the authority of the Safe Drinking Water Act by the EPA. It undergoes routine compliance monitoring by the utilities and by state and federal agencies. And this routine monitoring generally is focused at regulated contaminants, and most of the monitoring is conducted prior to distribution, so not at the point of actual consumption and exposure. So commercial bottled water is regulated by the FDA, and the FDA applies the Safe Drinking Water Act National Primary Drinking Water Standards to bottled water. It also has compliance monitoring regime, and it's typically periodically visiting the packaging plants to assess compliance. And then private wells or private supplies, which in the US is overwhelmingly private wells. And that's defined as a well system that has fewer than 15 connections and serves fewer than 25 people. There is no federal authority under the Safe Drinking Water Act for compliance monitoring or regulation. So as a result, private wells are rarely monitored, and there's a general lack of information on contaminant mixture exposures in private well systems. So the approach that we employ in this research team is illustrated in this slide. The analytical toolbox that we employ includes more than 500 organic contaminants. These include cyanotoxins. These are compounds associated with harmful algal blooms, for example. Disinfection byproducts. These are typically associated with chlorine disinfection in public supplies. As you just heard from Jason a second ago, per and polyfluoral alkyl substances have been a part of our toolbox for a while. Pesticides and pharmaceuticals, as we indicated earlier, both of these compound classes are specifically designed to have biological effects, and pharmaceuticals are specifically designed to affect human metabolism. And then we also assess volatile organic chemicals, which include many of the regulated compounds. And we monitor inorganic chemicals as well. Nitrate is a major ion that Jason discussed earlier, and then trace elements like arsenic and lead and uranium, and a range of other indicators of potential contamination. So the overall approach that we take is we have a sampling team that goes in and conducts all the sampling for all of our studies on point of use tap water, drinking water. And the study approach includes a range of quality assurance samples, including field blanks and laboratory assurance samples as well. The samples are immediately, after collection, immediately placed on ice and carefully packed each day and shipped daily on ice for overnight delivery at laboratories and immediate analysis. So the next couple of slides will give you a quick introduction to some of the contaminant signatures that we're seeing in drinking water. This first slide is specifically summarizing our original national reconnaissance study. So for this study, we collected 26 samples from 11 states across the US. The samples were split evenly between home locations and office workplace locations. The home locations were split between half of the sites being private well supplied and the other half being on public supply. All of the office locations were on public supply. We also sampled one commercial bottled water station in one of the offices. So just a brief and select overview of some of the contaminants of potential human health concern that we're seeing in drinking water at the point of use. You have this graph at the bottom. The light blue box is the private well sample locations. The other two boxes are for public supply locations, either in home or workplace locations. And we're just showing the results for lead and uranium. There is no known safe level of exposure to vulnerable populations for either lead or uranium. So any detection of these compounds is a potential human health concern. And in the case of uranium, this one result illustrates the increased risk of an unrecognized exposure in private well samples. This concentration of uranium in a private well sample is actually 2 times the EPA limit for public supply. Out of the 482 organic compounds that were assessed in this study, 75 of them were detected. You can see those displayed over here on the right. If your interest is in Pfas compounds, all the compounds with a PF in the abbreviation are Pfas compounds detected in drinking water. So on average, the median number of organic compounds detected in samples in the study was 13. It ranged from 1 to 30 compounds per sample, and these included disinfection byproducts, Pfas compounds, pesticides, and pharmaceuticals. In 2018, we conducted another study. This one was located in Cape Cod, and the purpose of this investigation was specifically to compare private well exposures to those exposures seen in public supply locations. And the research was conducted on Cape Cod because the source water for drinking water, whether it's private well or public supply at Cape Cod, is the same shallow aquifer system. So the public supply locations are shown as squares on this map, and the circles indicate private supply locations. So just a quick overview of some of the results. For the inorganic results, the public supply locations for a given constituent are the shaded boxes, the private supply are the open boxes, and the dotted dashed lines indicate, in the case of red, indicate the EPA regulatory limit. And for lead here, the black line indicates the action level for lead. So we see in several cases where you have generally comparable concentration between public supply and private supply, but in some cases you'll have private supply exceedances of the public supply MCL. For example, for copper, and an exceedance here of lead in a private supply. But again, lead has no known safe level of exposure, and so lead exposures are seen fairly routinely in both public and supply locations. And typically lead contamination is associated either with the distribution system or with premise plumbing. If we look at the organic results in this study, we assessed more than 540 analytes. 70 of them were detected at least once. They're displayed here along the left hand of the axis. And I've got these results broken out by public supply here on the left and private supply locations here on the right. And then they're broken out by subclass over here on the far right. So you can see a wide range of contaminant exposures in both public and private supply. One example here of the risk of unrecognized exposures in private supply is this set of pharmaceutical detections, all of which occurred in a single private supply location. So in this study, the median number of organics that were detected in drinking water samples was 10. Again, it ranged from 1 to 30 compounds and included a wide range of classes. So we continue to do these kinds of studies across the US in a range of hydrologically vulnerable settings and for at-risk communities. We did a study in 2018 in Northeast Iowa, which was focused specifically on intense agricultural environments and private well-dependent locations. Another study conducted in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria devastated the island. And then more recently, a study in 2020 where we're looking at and applying the same analytical toolbox to bottled water samples. So this is contact information for myself. I and Kelly Smalling are the co-leads for this national team. You can reach out to any of the three of us to get additional information. And if you want to, you can click on that QR code in the bottom right-hand corner, and that'll take you to a site that describes this overall research portfolio. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Jason. So we're going to enter into our question and answer time now. Paul, if you want to stop sharing your screen there. Great. For those that are joining us on YouTube, feel free to post a question in the chat and we will ask our speakers. And again, thanks to both of you. That was a very information-heavy presentation. I understand that we will probably be able to share the PowerPoints for the speakers on our Community Conversations website. So for folks who'd like to go back and look at some of the data or click on some of the links that were mentioned, we should have those available later. We have a question from Maureen for Mr. Bradley. Do you feel it's possible for an ordinary citizen to access and view the data about specific water and understand it? Or what improvements might you make?
So in terms of accessing the water data, a lot of state
Paul,
agencies.
would you unmute your video so we can see you?
Sure.
Thanks.
So in terms of accessing data, a lot of state agencies do the same thing. Federal agencies often do it. The USGS data is made publicly available, so you can always go and access that. One way to get to the information is through the National Water Information System of the USGS. There's also a water portal that you can access for information for both EPA and USGS. We have an obligation to do outreach like this presentation here, where we have conversations and try and put the results in a kind of an accessible form. So answer questions for people. And then obviously we also produce scientific products, which can be dense. And so, yeah, those can be challenging to understand, but you can always reach out to the investigators and have conversations if you have specific questions.
Thank you. I noticed that in the data, it looks like there's a lot more contaminants often found in private wells versus public water sources. Are there recommendations about that? Are there testing services people should make use of?
Is that to me?
That question is for either.
Okay. So I'll take a stab at it. Yeah, I don't know that our data bears out the generalization that it's always more detections in private supply than public supply. Across the nation and across all of our studies, they're actually fairly similar. There are some differences. For example, you see disinfection byproducts are generally just restricted to public supply. You don't often see them in private supply. But the challenge is there across public and private supply. The biggest difference between public and private is the lack of data, and these kinds of assessments can be very expensive, and so generally you don't have much data for private supply. So the big risk is that any kind of contaminant exposure is going to go unrecognized, and that's a large part of the motivation for this research effort. Is we're trying to get a better understanding so that we can make decisions about potentially conducting more frequent monitoring of private supply and as we move forward.
All right, thank you. Paul, Jamie online says you are coming to La Crosse next week. Tell us more. I'm not sure what she's talking about, but.
Yeah, so Kelly Smalling, who's also on the call here, and I have been asked to come to Viterbo University's What's in Your Drinking Water symposium that's being conducted. I guess it starts next Thursday and it's going all day on Friday. And so we will be presenting on our tap water research portfolio over 2 sessions of an hour long each. So if you're interested in these results, then you can get much more information during those sessions.
Great, thank you. So a question, and this would be for either of you. You know, as we look at these different contaminants, which of these are forever chemicals that are just going to be there, and which of these will deteriorate over time? What are remediation options?
I can talk about PFAS specifically. I'm trying to start my video here. Sorry.
Thank you, Jason.
So yeah, PFAS are considered forever chemicals. Some of the PFAS will break down partially under natural conditions. But they will still, the breakdown product will still be another PFAS compound. So not going to necessarily be any less, and the breakdown product isn't necessarily going to be less toxic than the parent compound. The carbon fluorine bond that forms the backbone of those PFAS compounds, that's one of the, if not the strongest bond in nature. So it takes a lot of energy. So those basically don't really break down under natural conditions. So as far as remediation goes, there's a lot of experimental techniques that are, being researched, but they generally take a good amount of energy to actually destroy those bonds. So what people have typically been doing for drinking water is to just set up and we're going to actually be having a discussion on this at our next PFAS technical group meeting on April 22nd. There's information on our webpage for that, but running that water through a granular activated carbon system, maybe with some ion exchange resin, so that basically the PFAS come out of the water, they stick to that resin. And so what the water that comes out the other end is cleaner, or it's clean. But then that resin eventually has to be disposed of. So basically, the PFAS get concentrated onto this absorbent.
So filtration is possible.
Yeah,
as an option. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. We're still looking for some questions for folks online, but again, these numbers can look pretty scary to lay people. What is there? Is this one of those things where, oh gosh, we all need to worry about this? Or is this the sort of thing where we need to try to be informed about our local water sources, and if we're not hearing problems, we're probably okay, kind of thing?
I think for PFAS, we definitely, we don't recommend that every single person in the state go out and get their water tested for PFAS. If there's a known source, or we're become aware of a good likelihood of contamination, we'll the DNR and DHS, like we have for the town of Campbell, we'll let people know. But definitely for that French island with so many contaminated wells, for PFAS, we recommend that people do get their get that water tested, or else at least get the bottled water. So I think information is the key. Those health-based level. The only other thing I'll say is those health-based levels of that level of 20 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. That's meant to be protective of the most sensitive population. So in this case, it would be, like I said, it would be child, pregnant women who maybe could become pregnant in the near future, or women that are breastfeeding.
Okay, thank you. Carl asks for water that includes PFAs, is it still possible to use it safely for showering, bathing, watering the lawn, other uses, not drinking?
Yeah, there's information on the Department of Health Services webpage on that, but I believe as long as you're not ingesting it, that should generally be fine. Dermal, if you have cuts or something like that, dermal contact can be an issue, and with some type of cooking, if it's some kind of cooking that's where you're gonna absorb a lot of water into the food, like let's say you're making oatmeal or something like that, I think they that's very different than if you're just using water to rinse something off. So it kind of depend on the situation. But yeah, I think showering, things like that should generally be okay. But there's always, whenever you come in contact with the water, there's always this chance of incidental ingestion or have it enter through a cut or something. So still something to be aware of.
Okay, thank you. Ron asked the question, nitrates come into our water from farms, particularly high animal concentration farms. Is there anything that can be done about that?
And we can tag team it. I mean, there are options. So if you're on a private well and you have concerns about drinking water, or if you just want to be protective in general, you can do point of use treatment options. So there are a range of point of use treatment options that you can install. Nitrate can be taken out by absorptive media, and you can use a carbon filter or some variation of a carbon filter to help reduce concentrations of Pfas compounds also in point of use drinking water. So there are options out there. Jason?
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to say. I was going to actually speak to the whole issue of getting it out of the water in the first place, and that's really tough to do with nitrates because in some areas, especially certain parts of the state, it's just it's just so prevalent. It's hard. Sometimes it's even hard it's really hard to identify a source, particularly like in the central part of the state, or high agriculture areas.
We are known to have a few cows here in Wisconsin, so
fertilizer also is a potential source.
Okay. So another question for Maureen, for Jason. This would be, do you have some thoughts about the realistic long-term solution for French Island? For instance, connecting to municipal water or what? There are a lot of opinions out there. So
yeah, that's a tough one. That's something that we're gonna have to continue to look at. Maybe hook up to to a municipal. I think that it's been discussed. Hooking people up to the city of La Crosse water system. I mean, that'd be really expensive. With all the with all the piping and stuff that would be needed. The problem is if typically you can always put deeper wells in, but a lot of times if you have everybody, their wells are at a certain depth and everybody gets a deeper well, then that contamination can just be dragged down to those. Because you think of those wells like a straw, they're sucking up water. So as they suck up water, there's water coming in from all directions, from above, from below. So if people install deeper wells and you're in that, it's a sandbox geology where everything's really well connected, you could just drag that contamination down to those greater depths. So it is, I don't think there's no grand solutions at this point that I'm aware of. Dave Rosenblum, like I said, he may have more specific information on that.
Okay, and we have one final question. This is from Lee, who lives in the town of Campbell, and she is wondering if Wisconsin has a safe mechanism to dispose of highly concentrated contaminated filters.
Yeah, it is legal. PFAS is not regulated as a hazardous waste in Wisconsin, so If you can find a landfill that will take it, that's perfectly legal. We recommend that you let the landfill know, though, if you're going to do something like that, because a lot of landfills do not want that type of waste. So sometimes it can be, and that's because it creates the wastewater treatment plants, which take the leachate from the landfills. They're not really designed to remove PFAS, so that PFAS will just, it'll go from the landfill leachate, it'll pass right through the wastewater treatment plant, and end up in the surface water. So a lot of landfills, because of the problems with the wastewater treatment plants, the landfills don't want it. But there are some landfills that will take it. So it's best to contact the landfill. There are some companies, I believe, that are consolidating various waste like that, and then they're shipping it to a landfill that will accept it. So there's some consolidation that goes on also.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank both of you very much for your participation today, and on behalf of our folks who've joined us, thank you. This has been very informative. It sounds like there is an opportunity to follow up next week at Viterbo if people want to continue this conversation. And Jason, thank you also for sharing contact information for reaching out yourself. Reminder to those who are joining us online that we will have one more community conversation in this spring season. That will be April the 20th. And the topic will be on electric cars and electric transportation and how those might make a difference, both locally and how they can save the world, maybe. So we hope you can join us for that. We may have information about whether we can actually have a live conversation versus doing this online. So stay tuned, and we'll share that as the situation grows and we have more information to share. And again, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you in a month. Bye.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And I will stop recording. And thank you, Jason, very much. And we'll see you in a little bit, Park.